Welcome, dear listener. You are now entering a journey through history, a quiet journey where time slows down and the past opens its doors to us. Before we begin, we kindly ask you to subscribe to our channel, leave a gentle like, and if you feel inspired, share your reflections in the comments. Your support keeps this space alive, a place where learning and rest can exist together. Now, let's drift back into the deep winters of the Middle Ages, a world where snow was heavier, nights were longer, and survival was never guaranteed. The year is 1315. A village in northern Europe lies silent, blanketed by heavy snow. The fields, once golden with wheat, are now locked in ice. The river, once flowing with life, stands still, frozen into silence. Smoke rises weakly from the thatched roofs, a sign of fire within struggling against the endless cold. The world feels hushed, but beneath this quiet is hardship. Winter is not simply a season of beauty here, it is a test. Modern science tells us of a period known as the Little Ice Age. It began in the late Middle Ages, a shift in global climate that brought colder, harsher winters. Volcanic eruptions darkened the skies. Solar activity weakened, and the earth cooled little by little, year by year. For people then, there was no science to explain it, only the evidence of their senses. The frost that lingered longer each spring, the harvests that grew thinner, the cold winds that arrived earlier every autumn. It was as if the world itself had changed its breath. Step inside a peasant's home. One single room, with walls of wattle and daub and a roof of straw. The floor is earth, hardened by cold. In the center, a hearth glows faintly. Families huddle close, wrapped in wool cloaks and rough blankets. The fire crackles, but wood is scarce. Every log must be saved, every ember watched carefully. Winter was hunger season. Grain, stored since autumn, must be rationed with care. Porridge is thin, bread is coarse, meat is rare. The wealthy might enjoy salted pork or dried fish, carefully preserved months before. But for most, every bite is measured, every meal uncertain. In years of famine, hunger became desperation. The Great Famine of 1315 to 1317 began with endless rain, failed crops, and then the merciless winter. People ate what they could find: roots, acorns, even the bark of trees. Stories tell of darker measures taken in the shadows of starvation. The snow outside glistened, but beneath its beauty was despair. Even in the coldest days, life could not stop. Animals needed feeding, water had to be broken from ice. Men trudged through snow to chop wood, their breath clouding the air. Women spun wool by the fire, their fingers numb in the chill. Children carried small bundles of sticks, learning early that survival was a duty for all. Every task was heavy with cold. Tools froze in the hands. Leather stiffened. Frost clung to every surface. And yet, they continued. When winters grew cruel, people turned to faith. Church bells rang across frozen valleys, calling the faithful to prayer. Inside stone chapels, candles flickered, casting warm light against walls of ice. Priests spoke of sin, of trials, of God's testing hand. Communities prayed for deliverance, for the return of spring. Feasts of light, like Christmas and Candlemas, offered hope in the darkest days. Songs were sung, bread was blessed, fires were lit in celebration of warmth yet to come. For many, it was faith alone that carried them through the bitter season. Imagine standing on the banks of the Thames in London. The river, so mighty in summer, now frozen solid. People walk across its surface. Merchants build stalls upon the ice. Children laugh as they slide upon it, while fires burn in iron braziers to keep the crowds warm. A festival on a river, born only because winter's grip was so strong. And yet, beneath the joy, there is unease. What does it mean, they wonder, when rivers freeze and summers fade? Is this the hand of God or the turning of the world? And so the winters passed, one after another, stretching into centuries. Each village, each town, each family endured its own story of snow and struggle. from northern Europe to the valleys of Asia, from mountain villages to coastal towns. The same questions whispered in every hearth. Will the thaw come? When will warmth return? And as we drift further through these frozen stories, the winter of the Middle Ages does not end. It flows onward, from house to house, from century to century, an endless journey through snow and silence. In the Middle Ages, nights in winter seemed endless. Without modern lamps, the world was swallowed by darkness once the sun disappeared. The only light came from candles, flickering gently, casting long shadows across rough wooden walls. Imagine a family seated together in silence. The father sharpening tools by the fire, the mother mending wool garments, children whispering quietly, wrapped in blankets. Outside, wolves roamed the forests. Their howls echoed in the night air, a haunting reminder that nature was never far away. The wind pressed against the shutters, rattling, sighing, groaning, as though the earth itself was alive. In such silence, time itself seemed slower. Each night felt like a season. Each dawn was a victory. Travel in winter was perilous. Roads became rivers of mud or paths of ice. Carts stuck fast, horses slipped, and wagons overturned. Yet trade was life. Merchants pressed on, their goods wrapped in cloth and leather, their wagons heavy with salted fish, wool, iron, and grain. Pilgrims, too, walked through snow, seeking holy sights, their breath rising like smoke into the cold sky. Many never reached their destinations, but still they traveled because faith in survival demanded it. Picture the countryside under snow, hills rolling like frozen waves, trees stripped bare, their branches clawing at the gray sky, animals huddled in barns, their breath steaming in the cold air. Farmers checked their stores, repaired tools, and waited for the thaw. Children played, when they could, sliding on ice, shaping figures from snow. But always at the back of every mind was the question, would the food last? Would the spring come in time? Every winter was a gamble. Every year, a test. The medieval year was bound to the rhythm of the seasons. Spring brought planting. Summer, labor. Autumn, harvest. Winter, waiting. The cold months were a pause in the cycle, but never a rest. For the body worked to endure, and the mind prayed for renewal. This rhythm shaped the lives of millions, generation after generation. It taught patience. It taught endurance. It taught the fragile balance between humanity and nature. And so, our journey continues, from the dark homes of peasants, to the cold halls of castles, to the frozen rivers where people walked and celebrated upon the ice. Each scene, each life, a thread in the great fabric of history. Each winter, a reminder that survival was never simple. Why was the winter of the Middle Ages so harsh? Because the earth itself had changed, because life then was fragile, and because winter has always been a season that tests the soul. And yet, through hunger, through darkness, through bitter cold, they endured. Cold did not come alone. With hunger came weakness. With weakness came illness. The medieval winter was a breeding ground for sickness. Chill air carried fevers. Damp homes encouraged coughing, aching, the slow decline of strength. The poor, malnourished, and weary were most at risk. Doctors of the time spoke of humors and balances, of warm foods and cold winds. They prescribed herbs, warmed wine, and prayers. But often, the remedies were powerless against the tide of disease. Villages saw life fade during the bitter months. Small graves filled the frozen earth. And yet life continued because it had to. Not all felt winter equally. Inside great stone castles, the lords and ladies of the realm had more protection. Massive hearths blazed with roaring fires. Tapestries lined the walls, keeping out some of the chill. Tables, though less abundant than in summer, still bore bread, cheese, salted meats, and imported spices. But even within these stone halls cold crept in. Windows, though shuttered, let in drafts. Stone floors froze the feet. And beyond the castle gates, the villagers struggled. Winter was the great equalizer. No matter wealth or rank, None could escape its reach. Close your eyes and listen. The creak of frozen trees in the forest. The crunch of boots on snow. The faint trickle of a stream, still flowing beneath a skin of ice. The medieval world was quieter in winter. Fields lay still. Markets thinned. Travel slowed to a crawl. In that silence, every sound mattered. The knock at the door. The ring of the church bell. The distant howl of the wind. Winter was not only seen and felt. It was heard under drifting snow. Wolves prowled unseen, their eyes glowing faintly in the moonlight. Still, men entered the forest to gather firewood. Each step cautious, each sound amplified. An axe, striking a frozen trunk, echoed like thunder among the trees. The forest, beautiful and haunting, was both a gift and a threat. Even in the harshest cold, markets appeared in town squares. Stalls lined with woolen cloth, salted meats, smoked fish, honey, and candles. Merchants wrapped in cloaks stamped their feet against the chill. Customers haggled with numb fingers, trading coins that glinted in the pale light. The air smelled of smoke and bread, of wax and fur. And above the stalls, church bells tolled, calling the faithful to prayer. Markets were not only for trade. They were moments of community, of gathering, of survival together. For in winter, people needed each other more than ever. Cows, sheep, and horses were lifelines. In winter, they too struggled. Hay was stacked high in barns, but every mouth ate more than the stores could bear. Animals grew thin as the season dragged on. Children were sent to watch over them, carrying buckets of water, breaking the ice with stones. A cow's warm breath rose in clouds, filling the barn with steam. A horse's hooves stamped restlessly, impatient for spring. The life of man and beast was bound together. If the animals perished, the people would soon follow. Step now into a monastery. Stone walls, high and cold, yet filled with a different kind of warmth, the warmth of devotion. Monks walked the cloisters wrapped in woolen habits, their voices rising in chant. Inside, manuscripts were copied by candlelight. The scratch of quills against parchment was steady, even as the ink thickened in the chill. The library smelled of vellum, wax, and wood smoke. Prayer, study, and labor marked their days. For monks, the cold was not only hardship, it was discipline, a reminder of humility before God. Now picture the hall of a noble family. Long wooden tables, lit by torches and chandeliers. Platters of roasted boar, pies of venison, and steaming stews carried in by servants. Musicians played softly, their notes rising above the crackle of the fire. Jugglers or jesters performed, trying to draw laughter into the long night. Yet even here, the cold was present. Stone walls absorbed the chill. Servants hurried constantly, bringing wood to feed the flames. The feast was grand, but it was a fragile shield against the winter outside. Across the snow, pilgrims still walked. They carried staffs, wore cloaks, and bore tokens of faith pinned to their chests. Each step on frozen earth was an act of devotion. They walked to holy shrines, to cathedrals, to places where saints had lived and died. Their journey was long, their hardships many. Some collapsed along the way, their bodies taken by frost. Others reached their destination and lit candles of gratitude. In winter, every pilgrimage was both a danger and a prayer. Not only rivers froze, but seas as well. In the north, fishermen found their boats trapped in ice. Nets lay unused, and hunger grew sharper. Villages along the coasts turned to stored salt fish, to smoked herring, to dried cod brought from distant shores. The sea, once a source of plenty, became silent and unreachable. Its waves stilled under the weight of winter. And yet in spring, it would return, roaring and full of life once more. Even in hardship, people found joy. They danced at Christmas. They lit fire for the new year. They sang songs in taverns where warmth and drink were shared. The Feast of Fools filled streets with laughter and masks. Children played games upon the ice. Men challenged each other in contests of strength. Winter, though cruel, was also a time of memory, of gathering, of shared humanity. Joy and sorrow lived side by side. Walk again into the countryside. The fields are silent. The plows rest, their blades crusted with frost. The scarecrows stand stiff, draped in white. Beneath the snow, seeds sleep, waiting for the warmth of spring. Farmers pass by their land, their eyes filled with hope and with worry. The earth will awaken, but when? The silence of the fields is the silence of waiting. Winter after winter, year after year, century after century, the people of the Middle Ages endured. Some winters were kind, others merciless, but always life pressed on. Generations were born in the cold. Generations died in the cold. And still, humanity survived. Because even in the longest night, there is always a dawn. And so we circle back to the village by the frozen river, back to the castle hall filled with firelight, back to the monastery cloaked in chants, back to the family huddled together, whispering against the dark. Winter in the Middle Ages never ends. It flows like the snow, drifting across time. It calls us back again and again to listen to its stories. And as the wind rises once more, we move forward into yet another frozen night. In the corner of the village, the blacksmith's forge still glowed. Even in the depth of winter, tools needed mending, nails needed shaping, horses needed shoes. The blacksmith's hammer rang against the anvil, sparks flying like stars in the dark. Outside, snow fell in silence. Inside, the heat of the forge was a rare comfort. Children gathered near the doorway, warming their hands, watching the glow of iron as it turned red, then white, then cooled to steel. The forge was more than a workshop. It was a small beacon of warmth in the endless frost. Every village had its church, and every church had its yard. In winter, the ground froze so hard that graves were dug with great struggle. The tolling of bells echoed across white fields, heavy with sorrow. Yet, inside the church, light glowed. Candles lined the altar, incense drifted upward, and hymns rose like a shield against despair. Families gathered, their breath visible in the cold air, their voices trembling as they sang. The church was both sanctuary and reminder, a place where hope survived, even when the earth seemed unyielding. For children, winter was both wonder and hardship. They marveled at snowflakes, built figures from packed ice, slid down hills with laughter. But they also shivered at night, their small hands red with cold, their stomachs aching from hunger. Stories were told to keep them calm, tales of saints, of brave knights, of warm summers yet to come. They listened, wide-eyed, as the fire flickered. And in those stories, they found warmth that no blanket could provide. Not all could stay within village walls. Messengers, envoys, and heralds rode across the frozen land. They carried letters sealed with wax, news of wars, decrees of kings, and summons of faith. Cloaked in fur, they rode swiftly, hooves striking frozen ground, cloaks snapping in the wind. Many faced storms that blinded the path, but still they pressed onward. For in the Middle Ages, words were lifelines, and even winter could not silence them. Higher still, the mountains stood, silent, vast, eternal. Snow covered their peaks from autumn to spring. Villages nestled in their valleys lived in near isolation during winter. Avalanches thundered in the distance. Paths closed. Travelers vanished into the white. Yet in these mountains, people learned resilience beyond measure. They carved lives from stone and snow, waiting for the thaw that always came eventually. Return once more to the monastery. In the deep hours of night, monks woke to chant. Their voices rose in unison, low and steady, echoing in stone halls. Outside, frost covered every surface, glittering beneath the moon. Inside, their prayers bound them to each other and to their faith. They shivered, yet sang. They ached, yet believed. For to endure winter was, for them, to imitate Christ's endurance of suffering. Each note of their chant was an offering against the cold. By the fire, stories were told. Legends of spirits who wandered the snow, of white ladies seen upon frozen roads, of wolves who were not wolves at all, Fear and wonder lived side by side in these tales. Children huddled close, listening as the elders spoke in hushed tones. The stories passed from mouth to mouth, growing, changing, surviving. Winter was not only a season of survival, it was a season of imagination. Even in winter, monasteries kept gardens. Herbs grew in pots, sheltered from frost. Medicinal plants were dried and stored, their scents filling stone chambers. Monks walked slowly along frozen paths, beads of the rosary in their hands. Their breath mingled with prayer, with incense, with the silence of the cold. The garden, though barren in snow, was a place of peace, a reminder that spring would return, as it always did. Every village had a watchman. He patrolled the dark lanes at night, lantern swinging, staff in hand. He called the hours, his voice carried by the wind. Past midnight, all is well. Snow muffled his steps, yet his presence was known. Dogs barked as he passed. Frost gathered on his beard, on his cloak, on the iron of his lantern. The watchman was a guardian against thieves, against fire, against fear itself. And in the coldest nights, his steady call was a comfort to those within their homes. Across the countryside, church bells rang. Their tones carried far over fields of white, deep and solemn. They called the faithful to Mass. They marked the hours of prayer. They tolled for the dead. In snow, the bells sounded different, muffled, softened, yet somehow more haunting, a sound that belonged to the season, woven into memory itself. As we wander deeper into these winters, we see not one story, but many. Each family, each village, each traveler lived their own struggle, their own endurance. Yet together, they form a river, flowing through centuries, flowing through snow, flowing into us today. Winter, harsh and unyielding, was the constant backdrop to medieval life. And in that cold, humanity's strength was shaped. And so we circle back to the frozen hearth, back to the fields in silence, back to the monastery's chants, back to the howling wind across the hills. The winter of the Middle Ages has no end here. It drifts, it flows, it surrounds us. And as we move onward, the snow falls again, the bells toll again, and the story continues. In the center of many villages stood the well. In summer, it was life itself, clear, cold water for every family. But in winter, the well froze. Men and women broke the surface with iron bars, striking again and again until the ice cracked. Buckets rose slowly, dripping, heavy with slush. The sound of the rope creaking, the bucket scraping against stone, echoed in the silent air. Water was life, yet every drop came at a cost. Not all crafts were of iron or wood. Some men were smiths of words, scribes, poets, storytellers. By candlelight, they bent over parchment, ink freezing in its pot. Every word was shaped slowly, carefully, as the cold gnawed at their hands. Yet they wrote of kings and saints, of battles and prayers, of winters that seemed eternal. And through their words, the harshness of their time still speaks across the centuries. A knight rode across the plain, his armor covered with frost, his horse steaming with breath. The road was hard, the snow deep, the sky gray. His banner hung heavy, soaked by sleet. Yet his duty called him forward, perhaps to his lord, perhaps to war, perhaps to defend the weak. The clang of his harness was muffled by snow. The knight was not untouched by winter. He, too, was humbled by the endless cold. Even in hunger, people gathered to share. Bread was broken, stews were thinned to stretch farther, mugs of ale passed from hand to hand. Children laughed at shadows on the wall. Old men told tales of summers long past. It was not abundance that brought joy, but togetherness. Even in scarcity, they created warmth, not of the fire, but of the heart. Merchants led carts along frozen roads, wheels creaking, horses straining. Behind them, villages lay quiet. Before them, the promise of a city, its walls rising, its markets alive, its churches ringing with bells. The city was no warmer, but it was alive. Crowded streets bustled with trade, cloaks brushing against cloaks, strangers sharing stories of frost and famine. The city was survival through numbers, a place where winter could be endured together. Beneath the snow, the earth itself slept. Seeds lay hidden, roots lay quiet, the soil rested. Farmers stood at the edge of their land, gazing, imagining what spring would bring. The silence was heavy, but it was not forever. It was a silence of waiting, of breath held, of life ready to return when warmth touched the ground again. On the edge of the road, a wooden inn glowed with lamplight. Inside, a fire roared, and travelers gathered close, shaking snow from their cloaks. The smell of roasting meat filled the room. Ale foamed in mugs, laughter rose, stories were exchanged. Outside, the storm raged. Inside, strangers became companions, if only for a night. The inn was a shelter not only from the snow, but from the loneliness of the road. In a university town, a scholar sat bent over his books. His chamber was dim, lit only by oil lamp and fire. His breath hung in the air as he read Aristotle, copied Latin texts, pondered the mysteries of the stars. The world outside was frozen, but within his mind burned a fire of thought. Knowledge itself was a shield against despair. And so, even in the hardest winters, learning endured. High on a hill, an abbey stood against the snow. Its bells rang each hour, their notes drifting far across the valley. Travelers, hearing them, found courage to walk a little further. Villagers, hearing them, found comfort that prayer still rose. The bells were voices of faith, stronger than wind, older than frost. They did not silence the winter, but they gave it meaning. And then, snow again, falling softly, endlessly, covering roofs, covering paths, covering footprints of those who had come before. The land was remade each morning in white, and with it, so too were the people remade. Each day, facing the same test, the same chill, the same endurance. Winter in the Middle Ages was not one moment. It was a lifetime of moments. Each flake of snow, each gust of wind, each long night was part of the story. By the river stood the mill, its great wolf frozen in place. In summer, water rushed and turned it tirelessly. But now, ice locked its motion, and silence filled the air. The miller, wrapped in a heavy cloak, checked the gears with gloved hands. He sighed, for the village bread would be scarce. The wheel would not turn again until the thaw. The stillness of the mill was the stillness of hunger. On the walls of a small fortress, lanterns glowed in the night. Guards walked slowly, their boots crunching in snow. They pulled cloaks tight against their bodies, watching the white fields below. The enemy was not always an army. Sometimes it was simply the cold. Sometimes it was hunger creeping closer, unseen yet deadly. In spring and summer, orchards gave fruit. Apples, pears, plums, sweetness for the table, cider for the jug. But in winter, the branches stood bare, black against a gray sky. Snow rested heavy on them, bending them low. Children still wandered through the orchard, leaving footprints in the snow. They dreamed of blossoms, of sweet fruit, of laughter among the trees. The orchard, though lifeless in winter, was a promise. That warmth would return. Deep inside the castle, the kitchen roared with life. Servants hurried between great hearths, where pots of stew simmered and bread baked in stone ovens. The air was warm, thick with the smell of herbs and roasting meat. It was here that survival was planned each day. Which stores would last, which barrels to open, which spices to use sparingly. The kitchen was the true heart of the castle, for without it, even lords and ladies would starve. Snow did not stop war. Men marched across white fields, their armor shining dully beneath pale skies. The clash of swords was muffled by falling snow. The cries of the wounded rose, fading into the wind. When the battle ended, the silence returned. Bodies lay half-buried in frost. The earth itself seemed to mourn, covered in a blanket of white. Winter was not only hunger, it was also sorrow. In the heart of a walled city, the winter market thrived. Merchants shouted their wares. Woolen cloaks, salted fish, candles, boots lined with fur. The square was crowded with people, their breaths forming clouds above them. The smell of roasted chestnuts mingled with smoke from braziers. Jugglers performed, children laughed, coins rang against wood. Even in the hardest winters, life refused to be silenced. The market was proof. Humanity endures, even when the earth grows cold. Bridges became strange places in winter. The water beneath them froze, ice piling against stone supports. Travelers crossed slowly, their steps echoing in the cold. Some looked down and saw the river, still and white, flowing silently beneath. The bridge was more than stone. It was survival, a link between one life and another, a path across the frozen unknown. Far from the fields, near the coasts, men worked to harvest salt. Even in winter, the sea gave this gift, crystals formed, dried, stored in barrels. Salt was life, for without it, food could not be preserved. Men carried heavy sacks across ice, their breath steaming, their boots crunching on frozen ground. Salt stung their hands, but they endured, because with salt came survival. With salt, meat and fish could last until spring. In some towns, processions lit the night. Villagers walked with torches, singing hymns, their flames flickering against the snow. The sound of voices rose above the silence, filling the dark with light. They prayed for warmth, for health, for the end of famine. The torches glowed in rows, stretching through streets, across fields, down roads lined with frost. For a brief moment, winter itself seemed to retreat before them. And still, the seasons turned. Winter gave way to spring. Snow melted, rivers ran free, fields were plowed once more. But winter always returned. Each year, the people of the Middle Ages faced it anew. Each year, they remembered its lessons: patience, endurance, faith, and hope. The circle never ended. And so we drift onward, through another snow, another frost, another endless night. At the edge of a sleeping village, a rider prepared to leave. His cloak was heavy with frost. His horse's breath rose in clouds. The first light of dawn barely touched the snow, painting it pale blue. He carried letters sealed in wax, news of kingdoms, of trade, of faith. The road was treacherous, yet his duty was clear. Each hoofstep was a message pressed into the frozen earth. Deep in the forest stood a small wooden chapel. Its door was heavy, its roof weighed down with snow. Inside, a single candle burned upon the altar. Hunters and woodcutters paused here, kneeling before their work. They prayed for safety, for warmth, for food. The silence of the chapel was deep, as though the woods themselves held their breath in winter's grip. By the fire, one elder became the voice of the past. Children leaned close, their faces glowing in firelight. He spoke of summers long ago, of kings and saints, of winters harsher than their own. His words wove pictures brighter than daylight. The children listened, wide-eyed, forgetting for a moment the hunger in their bellies, the cold in their bones. Stories were food of another kind, food for the spirit. In monasteries, the bell rang for prayer. It echoed against frozen stone, across snow-covered fields, into the hearts of villagers nearby. Monks rose in darkness, chanting in voices that floated into the air like breath itself. The bell marked time, not in hours of warmth, but in hours of endurance. Every toll was a reminder. Life continues, even in the longest night. On the road came the minstrel, his lute strapped to his back. He moved from inn to inn, singing songs of knights and love, of saints and miracles. In winter, his fingers froze upon the strings. But still he played, for a warm coin in a tavern, for a bowl of stew by the fire, for the joy of keeping music alive. His songs were fragile sparks, drifting across a frozen land. The vineyard, so full of life in summer, now slept under snow. Vines curled like black veins against the white. The barrels in the cellar waited, holding the labor of warmer months. Wine was not only drink, it was medicine, it was trade, it was hope in a cup. And so, even in winter, the vineyard remained part of life. Silent, but never forgotten. High in the hills, the shepherd watched over his flock. Sheep clustered together, their wool thick, their breath steaming. The shepherd wrapped himself in furs, staff in hand, eyes scanning the horizon. Wolves lurked in the distance, hunger driving them closer. Snow fell quietly, covering the world in stillness. The shepherd whispered prayers as he kept watch. For both sheep and shepherd, survival was the same struggle. In every home, the hearth was life. The fire burned low, but it never died. Ashes were stirred, sparks coaxed into flame, wood added carefully. Families gathered around, their faces lit with orange glow. Here, stories were told, meals shared, songs sung softly against the wind outside. The hearth was not only heat, it was memory, tradition, the center of existence. A bridge stood under the stars, arches heavy with frost. Travelers crossed it in silence, their lanterns glowing faintly against the dark. Below, the river was frozen, silent, still. Each footstep echoed. Each lantern swing was a promise. There's always a way forward, even in the coldest of nights. Stand now upon a hilltop. Before you, the land stretches in white. Fields, forests, rivers, all erased by snow. The horizon is endless, sky and ground blending together in pale silence. This was the world of the Middle Ages each winter. A world both beautiful and merciless. A world that tested humanity year after year. And as the wind whispers again, the story does not end. It drifts forward into yet another winter. Another night, another dawn. Behind stone walls, the monk's garden lay buried in snow. Herbs that once healed the sick now slept beneath the earth. Paths that once bustled with quiet footsteps were erased by frost. A monk walked slowly, hands folded in his sleeves. He knew the soil would awaken again, but for now, the garden was still. Even silence was a form of prayer. Far in the forest, a wolf howled. Its voice carried across valleys, over frozen rivers, into the ears of sleepless farmers. It was a sound of hunger, of the wild pressing close. Doors were barred, fires fed, prayers whispered. Winter was harsh not only because of cold, but because hunger touched beast and man alike. Atop a lonely tower, a beacon burned. Its fire cracked, struggling against the icy wind. The guard wrapped his cloak tighter, stamping his feet for warmth. The flame was more than light. It was a promise to travelers on the road below. It said, "Here is safety. Here is shelter." And so long as it burned, the nights seemed less endless. In small chapels, villagers prayed before wooden icons. Their surfaces were worn smooth by countless hands. Candles flickered, wax dripping slowly, shadows dancing on painted faces. In winter, faith was not decoration, it was survival. Hope carved into wood, belief painted on a stone, a shield against despair. At the edge of a village, the river froze solid. People crossed it carefully, hearing cracks beneath their boots. Some dragged sleds with firewood, others carried baskets of grain. The river, once a barrier, became a bridge. But each crossing was a risk. For beneath the ice, water still flowed, unseen, unstoppable. In the castle, a noblewoman sat by a tall window, wrapped in furs. Her chamber was lit by candles. The walls hung with tapestries to keep out the cold. She stitched cloth slowly, each thread bright against the dim light. Her thoughts wandered to spring gardens, to summer festivals, to warmth. Even wealth could not banish winter. It could only soften its edges. The blacksmith's hammer rang, but faintly. The forge burned low, struggling to heat iron in the bitter air. His breath fogged before him, sweat freezing on his brow. Still, he struck, shaping metal into tools, into horseshoes, into weapons. The village depended on his labor. Even fire had to fight against the weight of the season. A pilgrim walked slowly along the road, staff in hand, cloak heavy with frost. Each step crunched upon the frozen earth. Around his neck hung a simple cross, swinging with his stride. He walked not for comfort, but for meaning. Through hunger, through frost, through silence, he moved steadily forward. For in the Middle Ages, even in winter, the journey of the spirit did not cease. In the center of town, the church bell hung still. Its metal was rimmed with ice, its ropes stiff and frozen. When it finally rang, the sound was dull, heavy, yet powerful. It echoed across the fields, calling the people to gather, to hope, to endure together. Even frozen, the bell's voice carried strength. Above the cold earth, the stars burned bright. The moon cast silver across snowfields, turning the world into a pale mirror. Villagers looked upward, their worries pausing for a moment. The heavens seemed eternal, untouched by hunger or frost. And in that sight, they found comfort, that though winter ruled the land, the stars ruled the sky.